In The Chosen Season 5, Episode 2, we have a lot of really interesting things that are happening, but let's jump into this roundtable and hear it from the experts. This should be an interesting one, so let's jump in and I'll give my thoughts as we go along. Here we go.
Well, this is going to be a fun one because normally we cover multiple topics.
Hello. I literally just got finished right before starting this video saying how much the Chosen website just messes up every single time I try to use it. It is the most annoying thing, and I'm going to leave this in the video. Hopefully someone from the Chosen team is watching this and you guys can fix it. It is the most annoying thing in the universe. And now it's asking me to sign in with something that now it's just kicked me out. Now I have to re-log in, by the way. Okay, let me re-log in here. Okay, we're re-logged in now. Okay, now it's working. Okay, here we go.
It's going to be a fun one because normally we cover multiple topics and we get a little into each one. Well, this time we're going to focus on the most fun, the most exciting, one of the biggest scenes we've ever done, the biggest moments of this season, and one of the biggest moments in the Gospels, and that is Jesus turning over the tables in the temple. And so we're going to deep dive into the temple and why this was such a significant moment.
Hey, deep diving is my thing, Dallas. You know that. Dallas, it's my thing. Okay, let's continue.
And what it meant.
Obviously, very cool stuff here with the Roundtable. We love the Roundtable guys. I think they do an amazing job of breaking these things down and showing us some unique perspectives when it comes to these episodes. So let's dive in.
Briefly, though, before we get into the fun and exciting stuff, let's do the boring stuff like the Last Supper. No, I'm joking, of course. But the Last Supper, a little bit more of a muted moment, and it takes place at the end of the week. But as we know, at each of the episodes, we touch on a little bit of the Last Supper. And this one is where Jesus does the big prediction, among multiple big predictions, but one of the most devastating ones, telling Peter that he's going to deny him 3 times while Peter is in the midst of declaring his loyalty. Why do we think Jesus did this? I mean, the denial of Peter, what's this setting up? Is there some long-term thing at play here? Is Jesus teaching him, don't be so proud of yourself? Is this the kind of thing that leads to Peter being so loyal moving forward? I mean, it's this sad moment in the Gospels, but I mean, Peter never stops messing up, right? Even with Paul later on, Peter is still doing things that Paul deems not right? And they fight over certain things. And so Peter is never perfect, right? Paul is never perfect. Nobody in this world that is a follower of Jesus is ever perfect. And so there's never this like moment of like, oh, Peter understands everything and then he's good, right? But for this moment within the Last Supper, it is so important that Peter has this moment of realization, because what's happening here, in all honesty, there's a parallel between Judas and Peter. Judas is being told, hey, I'm going to die, just like Peter's being told, hey, I'm going to die, right? These things are going to happen. I'm going to be crucified. I'm going to be lifted up. I'm going to be given over to the elders. They're going to beat me. I'm going to be killed, right? They're both being told these things. And what is the outcome here? Both of them sin. Right? So Judas sins by betraying Jesus. Then Peter also betrays Jesus, just in a different way that is, we deem it as less important, right? But in actuality, it's just as important, because Peter then denies Jesus 3 times. And then what happens after that? Well, both Judas and Peter get a moment where they can go back to forgiveness. Judas decides that he's going to take his own life, and he takes away that option for himself. Peter, however, continues, and he joins in with the rest of the followers of Jesus. He tries to do his best. Then he's confronted by Jesus, and eventually he's confronted on the shores of Capernaum, where he forgives Peter 3 times, reinstating him as the person that he was before, as an apostle of Jesus. And so I believe that Judas could have had this outcome as well. He could have had an outcome where Jesus forgives him. It's possible. However, that's the difference here. And that's a parallel that I think is extremely important when it comes to this moment here. I think a good question is why?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think first we should note that it's not just Peter. He acknowledges that they're all going to fall away. In fact, I thought the writers did a really nice job with the translation here. There's a Greek spelling of the word you. In English, you could be singular or plural.
Right.
In Greek, when Jesus says, Satan demanded to have you that he might sift you like wheat, the you there is plural. He's talking to all of them. And then he focuses on Peter with a singular spelling for the word you on Peter. So Peter doesn't have to feel totally singled out. Everybody's going to fall away. But then why does Peter get all the emphasis? Yeah, great question.
I think the part is that Peter's the one that protests the most. He's the one that says, I'll never, it just says, I'll never do this. I'll never leave you. I'll die with you. And it really makes these extraordinary things that he can't follow up on. And, you wonder if Jesus is preparing him that he's going to fail for a failure that could have been devastating if Jesus hadn't said that and hadn't prepared him for that.
You're right.
Yeah, maybe for sure. I think in The Chosen, it is lessened a little bit because Simon does protest quite loudly, but then the rest of them kind of join in as well at different points within the Last Supper. And so like Peter will be like, I'll die for you, or I won't let that happen to you. And then everybody else will kind of join in, especially like Simon the Zealot and Big James and those ones there. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting moment within the Last Supper.
Right. In fact, Peter's the one who protests the washing of the feet. Which we're doing the Last Supper segments in reverse order. So we'll see that coming up. But I really like that, Father David. I think you're onto something there, that he gets the firmer rebuke because he's the one with the most protestations, and then has the responsibility of leadership, and so he's being prepared for this failure. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, as kind of the foundational disciple who gets the charge, who makes the confession at Caesarea Philippi.
Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it, Jason. He's opening the can of worms again to Caesarea Philippi and the declaration of the rock. This is such a big argumentative point in my community for sure. A lot of people have differing opinions when it comes to the rock and what that means, which is funny. Jason's being careful, I can see here, with a Catholic priest and a Protestant in front of him, of course.
I think he's being prepared, and I think there is this idea of he who is forgiven much loves much. And I think it's, again, it's going to connect back to John 21, where Peter is asked 3 times by Jesus, 3 times, do you love me?
Yeah, we don't want to give that away just yet. We're working on that. That's season 7. There's a really cool parallel there, but we don't want to spoil that. Let's break that from the record.
But Jesus...
yeah, it is a great parallel. Like I said earlier, Peter is reinstated, right? Why does he have to be reinstated 3 times when Jesus says, go feed my sheep, feed my sheep, feed my sheep, right? When he reinstates him and says, Peter, do you love me? He says that 3 times because Peter denied him 3 times, but now he wants an affirmation 3 times toward himself as Jesus is speaking to him. And so there's a reinstating that happens there from Jesus in season 7 that's going to be there.
Closing words here, after you return, strengthen your brothers. So that hope for the return is presented even with the prediction of his failure.
Yeah, and I'll give a little bit of a taste. In season 6, which the scripts you guys are going to be reading soon, just so you know, these guys all read the scripts before we go into filming to make sure that we are not going outside the boundaries of the truth and intentions and character of Jesus in the Gospels. But in season 6, that's one of the things that is hanging over Peter after he's denied Jesus, which is strengthen your brothers. Okay, Jesus told me that when I return, strengthen your brothers. So there's so many things that Jesus is saying during the Last Supper that we look back on as so clear. This is what's going to happen. I mean, he says we often forget. He told them he's going to die, he's going to raise again. All these things are so clear, and they were just like, yeah, I'm sure that's a metaphor or a parable. So,
Yeah, they could not understand, the scripture says, right? The Bible tells us that they could not understand what Jesus was telling them. Not that they didn't want to, not that they were thinking it was something else, but they were literally kept from understanding. Whether that's for the point of not defending Jesus and not, like literally stepping in front of a blade to protect him or whatever, or whether it's just because of their human minds, they didn't understand these things. We don't really know. But yeah, that definitely comes to play 100%.
But he says, so that when they do happen, when these things do actually take place, you're going to know that it was me. You're going to believe, because you're going to know that I am in control. Our concept is that after Jesus outright tells Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times, which is something Peter could never imagine, and then he does it. It's like after that, he's like, all right, from now on, I am all in, and it seems to kind of portend how he becomes in the birth of the early church, which is such a passionate, loyal leader.
Yeah, every detail is important. I think even the fact that he's going to deny 3 times, because from a biblical perspective, numbers are important.
I was waiting for this.
Right, all right.
Why 3, why not 4? I'm like, Rabbi Jason, there's something.
Right, there's something. Right, so 3 is the ultimate superlative. So 3 is the ultimate intensification. That's why the angels cry out, Kadosh, 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 holy.
Yeah, holy, holy, holy. It's the perfection of holiness. It's why we call it the Holy of Holies, because it is the innermost sanctum in which God exists, in the perfect zone, right? Within Jewish language, numbering has a lot to do with different intentionalities, right? So like 3 is kind of this perfection number, whereas like or it's like a legal number of like, we're gonna stamp this in stone, right? Whereas like 7 is more like perfection, right? Where it is the number of God, essentially. And so all these different numbers have different correlations to that. That's why 6 is such a big deal, because 6 is the number of man. And so when we see in Revelation 666, it's the epitome of man, right? And fleshliness and sinfulness in opposition to God.
Holy, holy, holy means the most holy. So if you say something 3 times, it means the most. You can say it from a biblical perspective for the greatest effect, for the greatest intensification. And so I think, it's why you love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, or with all your might. And so this is the negative, flipped version of that. It's a complete denial of the Lord. It's not a partial denial. It is a full denial and disassociation with the Lord.
So, we not only cover the cleansing of the temple, there's so many terms for this, the turning of the tables, the cleansing of the temple, the destruction of the market. We wanted to give some context, because it's out of context, it's a difficult thing to understand. At its simplest, you could say he was upset because they were selling things, and so he just got mad and turned over the tables. But we use the arrival of the Greeks, which is actually a moment in the Gospels where the Greeks come to Andrew and Philip and want to talk to Jesus. And so we bring back our Greeks from earlier seasons, and we use this as an opportunity to kind of explain how this whole system works and how sacrifice works. And
now I'm really curious as to what they say here, because I had a lot of pretty harsh critique here in episode 2. I think episode 2 was probably my lowest rated episode because of some of the things they got wrong within the systems of the temple. I think one, as an entertainment factor, it dragged on quite a long time in episode 2. And then also they just got some things completely wrong that are just straight up false whenever they talk about the systems that are in place within the temple. That was quite confusing to me when I was going through them. So I wonder what they say here.
I'll tell you, there are other people who read our scripts as well, including some folks from Israel who were concerned about this passage and this scene of showing the selling of the tables, because it can fall into some stereotypes about money and the Jewish people. And so they were like, we don't want it to be portrayed as that everything that they were doing in the temple was inherently wrong just because it involved money. And so that's why we have that line where Philip says, no, what they're doing is actually a beautiful representation of sacrifice, that the reason that we sacrifice for sin, we use animals to sacrifice for sin, is so that we don't actually have to be sacrificed ourselves as human beings. So that was one of the things we adjusted in the script, just to reflect that it wasn't, that not everything that was being done was wrong.
When I think of this, I think of two things. The marketplace. Jesus is not against business.
Yeah, so it looks like they're not really going to talk about it. I talked about this a lot in my episode 2 deep dive, which you can go back on the channel and check out if you'd like to. I even have a full 18-hour, like full-on marathon of my entire thoughts about season 5 if you want to watch it over there as well. But yeah, one of the major things that they got wrong was just like how the money works and what the money was and some different things there. But I talk all about that in my deep dive if you want to go check that out over there. There's some pretty major things that I thought were missed or misplaced within the episode.
But the marketplace had come into the temple courts. The market activities had encroached upon the worship territory. So I think of that encroachment as being upsetting to Jesus. And then the money exchangers that had become predatory, charging a little too much interest, and it was an opportunity for people to get away with stuff. So those are the two things that come to my mind that Jesus would be very upset with. People come to the temple to worship, and the temple is being crowded out. Worshipers are being pushed out by all of this transactional stuff that's actually doing evil to them.
Yeah, nobody could get to actually do what was important, which was the sacrifice, which was the communing with God, which was bringing these animals in order to atone for your sins. Because there's so much activity with the money changing and everything else. Imagine the millions of people that were going to be trying to go through this area. And if you've ever been to Israel, which by the way, we have an Israel trip coming up very soon in January, but then our next one is in January of 2027. So here's my little plug for that. You can go check out this. I'll put a QR code on screen, and you can go check it out in our description as always. And we'd love for you to be there in 2027. It's going to be an epic trip, and we're going to be on the Temple Mount where this all happened. And so if you want to see that, definitely go check out that trip. You can save your spot with $500 as a deposit. It's going to be absolutely amazing. But imagine the millions of people that would have been in this, like literally a couple of football fields worth of space. Like it's not very much space at all. Maybe 4 football fields put together, maybe a little bit bigger than that, but not much, not much. It's a pretty small space in a pretty small city in a very small country. There's not a ton of room here, and there are millions of people that would have been coming from all over to celebrate Passover during this time. It would have been extremely crowded and kept a lot of people from doing what they were there to do, which is to sacrifice.
Because Passover was one of the most popular and so many people came up to attend this festival, it was one of the times of the year that the merchants were actually able to set up within the temple precincts. Usually it was all outside, like even when you go to Jerusalem today and you go to the southern steps, you can see the booths of what were the money changers, and it's outside of the temple precincts. But on Passover, they allowed them to set up in the temple precincts, which is an exception, to the norm. But I think it's significant. Number one, it shows the historicity of the Gospels. The Gospels are always proven historically accurate, even on a small detail, with this is the one time of the year that there were money changers in the temple, and yet the Gospels is confirming this historical fact. So the veracity of the Gospels. But I think
yeah, that's something I love. There's never been a moment in archaeological history where we found something that disproves something in the Bible. What does that tell you? We have hundreds and thousands of confirmed things that the Bible tells us is true, and yet people still doubt whenever they read the Bible that something is going to be true from it, right? It annoys me so much.
Part of what upsets the Lord is the fact that this was the only place where the Gentiles could go. And so his house was called to be a house of prayer for all nations. So this wasn't necessarily affecting the Jewish worshipers, or particularly the male Jewish worshipers, but it was really affecting those of the nations that had come, and it was really treating them as second-class citizens and not valuing that they're made in God's image and they are coming to worship as well. And I think that's another aspect of what upset the Lord.
And the presence of the choir that you had in the midst of all that kind of indicated that this was supposed to be in some ways a place of prayer, but that was getting drowned out by all the other sounds.
Yeah, the money changer says, do you hear the singing? Do you hear all this stuff requires money? All of it. I mean, he's making what I think we oftentimes make is a rational defense for the fact that money is oftentimes involved in some of this stuff. But in that same scene, he's like, all right, now I'm going to add another 4%. I'm going to add another 5% because there's the temple tax. There's the.
He's got to be so careful here too, because there's so much money involved with the chosen and stuff that obviously people attack him about that nonstop, which is something that's, I think, ridiculous in a lot of ways. For the most part, most of the time, 95% of the time, let's say. But he definitely has to be careful with with dealing with all of that, because he obviously deals with millions and millions and millions of dollars when it comes to the chosen and through the companies that he's working with and all that kind of stuff. And so there's a lot of money here as well, right? And someone could easily turn that back on him and try to attack him through that, even though money is needed. Right. Money is needed to do whatever. Right. In this room right now, I have lots and lots of gear in this room that amounts to a ton of money, more money than I'm comfortable with. And sometimes, but it's useful in building the kingdom. And so that's what I do. I put money back into my business, into my YouTube channel in order to help to build the kingdom even more, in order to share as much knowledge and love and grace as I can to the world. And that's why God has me here. And so that money allows me to do these things. It's just a tool, right? So money in itself, as we hear from scripture, is not the problem, but it's the love of money that is the problem. And that's where all that comes from, which is why the money changers were such a problem within the temple there.
But I'm curious also, is there any Catholic tradition, Jonathan Rumi, who plays Jesus, who's a practicing Catholic, talked about that the turning over the tables in the temple is actually that every year it's talked about and pretty significantly in the Catholic Church. Is there something about this scene, this moment that has a particular resonance?
It's included in the regular lectionary cycle for the Gospels that we would read, right. And I think it shows the build up to Good Friday, and right. So it's just used in that way.
Yeah, from what I understand, and especially in countries like Italy, where that whole week is the whole country kind of honors it and acts it out in many ways. It's fascinating to see as it really does kick off in some ways the journey towards the cross, because it's the most public, blatant act by Jesus that is such an affront to not only the religious leaders but to merchants who might have previously been cool with Jesus, maybe might have been interested in him, but then when he literally upsets their whole business, it's pretty disastrous. So, anything else before we get into the actual activity and what when he gets there? But some of the setup, anything that stood out to you as right, or something that we might have gotten a little off?
I really liked the stone sign that was warning the Gentiles not to go past me.
Yeah, so this is a real thing that existed at the temple. They had this sign essentially that read just like this. Essentially this is saying, hey, Gentiles, if you go past this, you're taking your life into your own hands because you could be killed for being in a place where you're not supposed to be. And so, yeah, this is a real archaeological thing.
That the art department did a great job that we actually have one of those. It was an archaeological find, and I looked at the Greek and it was all there. Yeah. So yeah, it was really nice. Yeah. So warning the Gentiles, they can't go past this point.
Yeah, and was the belief that if they went past that point that God would strike them dead, or was it that they would have to, that some sort of authority or some sort of...
No, they would be arrested, just like we saw Paul falsely accused in the book of Acts of bringing a Gentile past that point and was arrested.
Yeah, this is a great example that I always love to bring up. Paul basically brings in, like, he's being accused of harboring Gentiles into the temple, and that he himself could be a Gentile, to the point where they want to even check his circumcision to make sure that he's not a Gentile, which is a very awkward thing in the middle of the temple. But yeah, very, very good passage to bring up here.
By the temple authorities. And the reason being is it goes back to the fact that this is the holiest place in the earth. This is the place where God's presence dwells. It's holy ground. And therefore, there were levels of ritual purity, holiness, and cleanliness. And those who are not in covenantal relationship, or those who didn't understand the level of ritual purity that was required, were limited from going past a certain point. So it could defile, in their minds, the service of the temple. So it was something very, very significant.
And yeah, imagine if a Gentile, right, a Roman or whoever else, like imagine if a Gentile or a rando walked into the temple and then touched the high priest in his ephod, right? Imagine what chaos that would bring. He would have to wait a certain amount of time in order to be purified, and in order to go through purification rituals, right? It would ruin everything. It would ruin absolutely everything. So yeah, that would be really, really horrible.
And here's sort of the irony of this moment. In the book of Acts, the Jews do violence against Paul because they assumed he brought a Gentile into the Jewish courts. Mm-hmm. So what happens is they cause an uproar, and then they start doing violence to Paul himself. They start beating him up, and he has to be rescued by the Romans.
Yep.
Jesus is doing violence in the temple courts here because the Gentiles are not being allowed to worship, because their worship space is being crowded out by the marketplace. So both portions of violence are somehow connected to the Gentiles, but Jesus is pro-Gentile space, which is an interesting irony.
And it becomes, kind of the background for this idea of what Paul writes about in the New Testament, in the book of Ephesians, about the middle wall of partition being broken down.
Yeah.
That Gentiles, whether it be in the synagogue or whether it be in the temple, were excluded from certain parts because they were not considered full members of the covenant, considered unclean, not as holy, considered not full members of the covenant community, even if they worship the God of Israel. What Jesus does is he's inclusive. He comes to tear down that wall. There's no second-class citizens in the kingdom, and I think that's where The Chosen does a good job of portraying Gentiles along with the disciples, whether that's historically accurate or not. Spiritually, theologically,
here's the Tamar and Simon of Cyrene flirting moment. I wonder what they're going to do with this in the future, if she's going to end up with him or what's going to happen there.
Significant.
So speaking of cleanliness and holiness, that brings us to the scene with John and Zebedee and Malchus, where we get into some, at times, uncomfortable conversations about cleanliness.
Where they're talking about wet dreams here, which is such a weird moment there. Everybody, when I talked to them, when this episode first came out, they thought they were talking about some other nighttime activities, but even talking about wet dreams, it's just weird, man.
How'd we do on that? How accurate were we in terms of the extraordinary lengths that they went to make sure that anyone who entered into certain areas would have been had to be ritually clean? So the questionnaire that we have Zebediah ask them was based.
And there he is, Korah himself. Just kidding, of course. He plays Zebediah here.
Some historical research, but how'd that?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that usually that took place before you went into the temple. So when you go to Israel, right, there's a famous scene in the Gospel of Jesus at the Pool of Siloam. The Pool of Siloam was a mikveh, was a ritual immersion.
A massive mikveh. Like, imagine your giant community pool, but even maybe a little bit bigger than that. And then that is what everybody would get into at the Pool of Siloam. So that is essentially a giant community mikveh where everybody would go in. It was huge. And then you would go up this large staircase all the way up to the temple. It's extremely beautiful back in the day. Now, the Pool of Siloam is actually being uncovered right now as we speak. It's been known, the location has been known for quite some time, but they haven't been able to excavate it until this last couple of years. And so finally that thing is getting uncovered. It looks amazing. And then the staircase is actually covered by local houses. So they can't actually get to the staircase that goes up to the temple because there's so many people that are living there. And so, yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. But the Pool of Siloam was the place where everybody went when they were coming into town from out of town. If you were, just a normal person, you weren't super rich, because there was super rich mikveh as well. But you would go there to like community pool and purify yourself before going to the temple.
What you'd have to do is ritually immerse. They would give you a token that said tahor, clean in Hebrew. You would go up the steps. So one step's for people going in, one step's for people going out, to make sure that the two don't touch each other. And so you'd have to present yourself as clean going into the temple. So I do think there was certainly a focus and a stringency.
And was it as strict as what Zebediah is doing with John? And we kind of portrayed it as to get into the chamber of oils, you have to go even further, or would that?
I mean, again, I think it's a possibility. I don't know if.
Yeah, there's just no evidence of any of it, I don't think. There's no like law in the scriptures that would tell us that, and there's no reference in archaeological finds or like things that we would know that would tell us like, hey, yeah, this is how it is. So it's probably just a guess, and not sure if that would be the case or not.
If there's any historical record of that, we have anything recording that actually took place, but it's plausible. Yeah. But one thing I just want to say is that I think from a Christian perspective, could look at it and be like, oh, that's just a bunch of rules and regulations and legalism. And it certainly can become that. But I think the understanding of the fact that the respect for the presence of God, the respect for the holiness of God, a sense of reverence for God, a sense of wanting to maintain a spiritual level of holiness, and even understanding.
Okay, this is so random, but I have to bring this up. Catherine says, Big James and Tamar is my ship. You want to traumatize that girl that badly? She goes and she sees Jesus being killed on the cross. Then she gets together with Big James, and then he's murdered and beheaded as the first apostle to die. That would be the worst. That'd be so bad. That'd be so traumatic. I'd feel so bad for her. It's good. That's good. I totally get the ship, but I'd be worried about the traumatic injuries she'd have mentally, for sure.
Like, these weren't arbitrary things that made people unclean. The reason why the Torah says if you touch a body, you become unclean, or if you touch a dead animal or certain things, you become unclean, or a woman in menstruation. The thing that connects them all together is that the temple is meant to be returned to the Garden of Eden. In fact, it's modeled after the Garden of Eden, with the cherubim on the curtains and the Ark of the Covenant and the presence of God and the veil with the cherubim. It's like them guarding the way back to the Garden of Eden. So the point is this: anything that has the remnants or residue of the fall cannot enter into the place that is meant to represent a partial return to the Garden of Eden. That's why a priest with a deformity, can't serve in the temple. It's not because God is anti-people or the Torah is anti-people with disabilities. It has to do with saying this is meant to represent the unfallen state. Sure. And so anything that represents the fallen state should be prohibited to some extent from coming in here.
But like us today, right, we always take these opportunities to show up ourselves as better than somebody else. And so the tradition of adding on new restrictions and a way to publicly display that I'm a little better than you because I can go in here, and that's where all these good intentions get piled on with sinful acts of human.
And I do think there's another aspect that the rabbis talk about this. They talk about fencing the Torah, right? So if God's requirement is here, the rabbis and generations keep extending the fence.
Yeah, which is like the oral law that's added later on. For example, like this is why the the man at the pool of Bethesda, Jesse in The Chosen, that's why he can't carry his mat during Shabbat, because he's been healed, and yeah, he can walk now, but he's not allowed to carry his dwelling or his mat with him from the pool of Bethesda to wherever he was going to go. And so, that was an oral law that's added later on. A lot of things are like this. For example, like you're not allowed to take a certain amount of steps away from like certain areas and things like that within the law. But then they're like, okay, well, what if we took a little bit of steps and then we stopped, and then we take a little bit of steps and then we stopped, and then we take a little bit of steps and we stopped. And they would get around certain things like that in order to like make it, it just became a whole chaotic event eventually, because they added so many things to it.
Fence. And, we can talk about why they do that. One reason that they give is because they're concerned that someone would break the actual commandment. So as generations grow more sinful, or as generations grow more comfortable, they keep extending it so that if they do break it, they break a rabbinic commandment and not a actual biblical commandment. But I think, again, sometimes, again, it's what's the intention of the heart, what that person is. So,
And I think it shows there's always a danger that something that's deeply symbolic and meaningful can lose that if people only remember the rule. Right. If they, they only look at the restriction and don't remember what's behind it. And so something completely different gets communicated, exclusion rather than holiness, and so it's a good reminder moment.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons why we have that conversation where Philip defends to the Greeks who are like, well, this doesn't sound like what Jesus is saying. And he's like, no, this is a beautiful picture. It's just been taken too far. Yep. But it's rooted in a beautiful thing. So that brings us to Jesus' arrival at the temple. Again, as we mentioned in the episode 1 Bible Roundtable, when he says Jerusalem, Jerusalem in the scriptures, that takes place on the Mount of Olives. We have him do it kind of throughout the week because it's just reflecting his sadness for all that's taking place. So he's just getting increasingly frustrated, has the exchange with the money changer, and then starts flipping tables. Now, the first question I want to ask is, there are 2 accounts in the Gospels of turning over the tables. Curious, the 3 of you, if you believe that this took place twice, or if it's just John, how John oftentimes takes an event and puts it in almost random, not random, but different chronological order, because he's communicating a theme.
Yeah, Jewish storytelling was rarely chronological. So Jewish storytelling a lot of times would be used in order to serve particular teaching points at particular times. So John uses this throughout his gospel because what he's essentially doing is like putting things in an order that makes sense for the things that he's trying to teach. So in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, right? At the very beginning of his gospel, the whole point of his gospel is to show that Jesus is God, not that he's just the Messiah, or not that he's just this dude that's coming to, teach these things, right? But that he is divine, that he is God. And so that is the whole purpose of John. And so he's using every story within this book to point towards Jesus' divinity, and having that be a talking point. So no matter if these things are in perfect chronological order or not, oftentimes these things are moved and changed in order to make them in the way that would teach the best way that Jesus is divine. And so that is a very common way of Jewish storytelling, for sure.
But we'll just do lightning round. Do you believe it happened twice, or
I would say I believe it happened twice.
Twice. Once at the beginning of his ministry, and then once here.
I've always thought it would have happened toward the end of his ministry, just once, and that John, extrapolated that earlier on for a specific purpose.
Yeah, I lean towards twice. The John chapter 2, early in his ministry, there are a few differences from the John chapter 2 to the Synoptic Gospels. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all put it here in Holy Week. But I'm very aware of the theory that, in a sense, John fast forwards to the cleansing of the temple in chapter 2, and then all the rest of the book of John is a recollection of what happened before.
Yeah, and believe it or not, I side with my my Catholic friend here.
That's how I read the script. It's like, okay, this is taking John.
If it wouldn't have been there, you would think it would have been brought up before.
Well, and that's my theory is if he would have done something this significant and this aggressive early in his ministry, it seems like it would have hastened the resistance that the religious leaders had towards him.
Yeah, I could see either way. I probably tend to probably lean more towards it's one event, not two. But I have no horse in the race. I don't really care that much. So I don't really have a huge opinion on this. Not something I would fight over for sure.
So I'm curious why you think that if it did happen twice, the first time, why it wasn't a bigger deal. Like it seems like it happens in the book of John and then he just kind of keeps going on. It seems like that would have really aroused more anger.
We don't know, is it on the same scale? We don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Number two, he didn't have the following. He's just starting out. So in a sense, I see it at the book of, we should get into at some point the theological reason as to why and the spiritual significance of why he would have done it at the beginning and the end and what he was actually trying to communicate by doing it, because I think that says a lot, whether you believe it's once or twice. There is a deep theological, spiritual point that's being made. But I think, I see it as a continuation of John the Baptist's ministry of reformation of the spiritual life, reformation and renewal of Israel's spiritual life. And the whole Gospel of John really starts off with the movement of John the Immerser, John the Baptist, and of calling out the religious leaders, even before Jesus did, and of him coming from a priestly family, and of him thinking about the corruption of the religious leaders, and Jesus being baptized, and now Jesus is continuing in that vein and taking it to the next level. Right. So I think there's a theological continuity there, but I still think there's a deeper reason we can get into.
I just don't think it really matters that much for me personally. Like there are so many thousands and thousands of other things that Jesus did in his life that we just will never, ever, ever know anything about. And so, yeah, he could have done this 7 times. He could have done it 20 times. Like we just don't know, right? These are the times that are pointed out in scripture because it's important, right? So whether it happened twice or whether it happened once, I don't think it really matters that much. From my perspective anyway.
I think it's interesting that none of the Gospels explicitly says Jesus ever got in trouble for overturning the money changers' tables. I think it's because everybody knew he's really right. We really shouldn't be doing the business right here. So if it were early in his ministry as well as at the end of his ministry, the kinds of things that Rabbi Jason, you're saying that he doesn't have as big as a following early in the ministry, so that didn't attract as much attention. Yeah, all of that makes sense to me. But for me, it's just these little details. The whip thing is only in the John cleansing the temple. The whip is not mentioned at all in the synoptic accounts, and those kinds of differences that make me lean towards 2. I'm curious about the theological thing with the number 2.
I knew as soon as you dropped that. There's deeper theological. We can get into some other time. No, they're not going to let you do that. Let's get into.
So, I mean, again, just let's remember that John includes many accounts that the other Gospels don't either. So do we say that he didn't turn the water into wine because the other Gospel accounts didn't include it? Or right. I'm sorry, but what was your
the beginning and ending, the book ending?
Right. So again, this goes into the context. So notice that both times that he does the cleansing of the temple, it happens in a very specific context, and the context is Passover. And why is that important? Every child has a responsibility to help prepare the house for Passover. And the key...
Yeah, like I mentioned before, these are the type of things that I'm like, I get kind of squirrely with when it comes to Rabbi Jason. Like I love a lot of stuff that he says, but I think it's like, it sometimes is like too much of a like red yarn on the board of like, putting this puzzle together sort of thing. I like more fixed sort of like things when I'm thinking about these things, just me personally.
Part of that preparation is the making sure that all of the leaven is removed from the house, because it's Passover. We left Israel hastily, so for the entirety of Passover, the 7 days of Passover, today 8, we don't eat leavened bread, we eat unleavened bread.
Exodus 12 is where they get into that, where prescribe the practice of
later,
cleansing the leaven.
Right, and later on in later episodes, which I'm sure we'll get into, we go into the elaborate detail of preparing the house for the Passover. Well, first and foremost, that is the children's responsibility to help their parents prepare the house for the Passover. And so think about it for a moment.
Games sometimes too.
Yeah, so there's a little game like in my house, on the evening before the first evening of Passover, you hide some pieces of leaven and the kids take a candle and a match and a wooden spoon and a napkin and they search from room to room. One year I hid it and we couldn't find it. Even I couldn't find it. And I'm like, what the heck? Did it magically disappear? Did God take it? Yeah. We had a golden retriever puppy. He got to it before we did. So I had to re-hide it. Okay.
He's just
right. But yes, it's called the search for the leaven. And the kids played a central role in the search for the leaven. Paul actually uses that as a background to, in Corinthians, a little leaven leavens the whole lump, clean out the old leaven that you may be a new batch. He's actually referring to this custom of the search for the leaven in the home as a background. But all that to say this, think about what Jesus says about the temple. He calls it his what? His Father's house. He is a good son. He's helping prepare his Father's house.
Yeah, I think it's just a stretch for me personally. I get what he's saying. It makes logical sense. This is the kind of stuff that I'm like, okay.
House for the Passover. So part of the point of cleansing the house of the Passover the first time was to establish his identity as a son of God. It's the son who has the authority and the responsibility to help his father and make sure the home is prepared for the Passover. And so it's showing who he is. He is the Son of God and therefore has a right to do this because it is his Father's house, number one. So I think John is trying to establish his identity. At the end, I think there's something else that's significant, which ties into the whole house of prayer for all nations, which is actually a fulfillment of a Messianic prophecy. There's a little oftentimes overlooked verse in Zechariah 14. Zechariah 14 is about the establishment of the Messianic kingdom, about all the nations joining Israel, going up to worship in Jerusalem, Jew and Gentile, worshiping in Jerusalem the king in the Messianic age. Yep. And it says, on that day, there will no longer be a trader, like Trader, a trader, a merchant in the house of the Lord. So what he's trying to say is that this Messianic prophecy is being fulfilled in your sight. The kingdom is about to come. The kingdom is not supposed to have merchants in God's house, and therefore,
yeah. See, like that connection, I like more than the other stuff.
Or you're beginning to see the fulfillment of this come to pass.
Oh, yeah, very nice, very nice.
Yeah. So, what else? I mean, is there any significance to the turning of the tables? We use that term a lot. We turned over the tables, which is a literal thing. I always found it interesting in this season. We kind of visually tried to contrast the Passover table with the turn. There's one table, there's the wrong table, and there's the good table. There's probably no biblical significance to that, but it was something that for this season felt right for us. In our marketing, it was even, we talked about the table is set, but also it applied to him turning over the wrong tables. But was there anything else that stood out to you in this scene as resonant or metaphoric? I think we got it.
You know what I would really like to see? I would like to see the stuff that like Dallas and the writers brought to the biblical experts and then was like completely shut down. Like no, we cannot ship that. Like no, we cannot put that in the season. I would love to see some of those things.
Right, in terms of accuracy. I mean, it seems like would it have been that big, right? I mean, he was really creating a scene.
No.
And that felt significant.
Yeah, the episodes, they talk about, well, he didn't really hurt anybody as the disciples are trying to figure out what Jesus
episode
did.
3, yeah.
Yeah. So I thought you protected Jesus' reputation, if you will, in this portrayal. Jesus is really upset with this disruption of worship. And that's his very explicit demonstration of you guys are doing this wrong. I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that Jesus is not angry on his own behalf. It's his Father's house. It's the worshipers who are being encroached upon. It's the same motive that brought him to the cross a few days later. It's out of love for people's connection to God that brought him to clear out the temple in the same way that brought him to die for our sins. It's the same motive. You know?
Yeah, and I think, again, the psalm is quoted, "Zeal for my Father's house will consume me."
Which is from the Gospels say that the disciples thought of that verse. We have Simon Z say that.
Yeah.
Zeal for
Yeah, and so from a messianic perspective, the Messiah was to be consumed by zeal, and especially for the zealousness and the proper worship of God. And this is often seen, this zeal as being, you see, Paul had this zeal, first wrong, then corrected. And then it ties back to the story in Hebrew, Pinchas, or I think in English, Phineas, who winds up, running a sword, a spear, through those who were defiling with immorality, and therefore priesthood is given to his descendants from that point on, out of the zeal. And so there's a sense in which Yeshua demonstrates his legitimacy to be the true high priest of his Father's house by that same level of zeal, just like it was with Phineas, who was granted priesthood. In the same way, this is kind of tying back to that, showing his zeal for God's house is part of the qualifying factor that shows him as one who is worthy to be the true high priest. Where the high priest in office wasn't concerned, here is the true high priest according to the order of Melchizedek. He is concerned.
And it's great to show the zeal, because it's easy to read that passage and just kind of hear it proclaimed, and maybe it's preached on, but this really shows that zeal meant energy and passion and concern, and it would have been on a big scale with all the people and all the things that were involved there. So I think people will really be able to understand this passage better because of the way it was portrayed.
Yeah.
I do think, I've talked about this before, people, a lot of you guys hate when I say this, but I do think it was one of Jonathan's weaker moments as an actor in this scene here. I thought him trying to portray that anger, it came out really weird for me, personally. But overall, really, really interesting. Let me see if there's anything else in here that we want to talk about. Anything at the end here? Only like a minute left.
It's a mysterious, on its surface, a mysterious passage, but when you get the context, it actually makes more sense than almost any other passage. It's like this is, if there's anything that would upset Jesus, it would be this. And so what's interesting about his zeal is that in this episode and in this moment in the Gospels, it's expressed physically. But in episode 3, which we're going to get into next, he gets even more passionate, I believe. Maybe he's not expressing it physically, but the things he says to the religious leaders about the hearts.
Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. We're going to get into that later, of course. Episode 3, we'll talk about that next time. Let me know your thoughts about this deep dive. If you have any thoughts about what I said or comments that I had or things that you wanted to add in here, I'd love to hear it. And we'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.